I am now delighted to introduce our speaker, Dr. Jeff Maddox. An associate professor in the Department of Psychology, Dr. Maddox studies the cognitive mechanisms of memory and attention and is the director of the Memory and Cognition Lab. He has established himself as a thoughtful teacher who brings his authentic self to the classroom and encourages students to do the same. As the winner of the 2020 Clarence Day Award for Excellence in Teaching, Dr. Maddox is a favorite among students because he puts students at the center of his pedagogies. He is committed to educating the whole student and approaches his work with students with compassion while also maintaining rigor and high expectations for all of his students. Please join me in welcoming Professor Jeff Maddox to the podium for his presentation titled, Knowing What You Don't Know, Moving Beyond the Boundaries of Your Own Knowledge. Following the convocation address shared by Dr. Maddox, we will close today's convocation program with the Rhodes Singers performing the Rhodes alma mater.
Class of 2024, to family, to friends, welcome to Rhodes. We are so excited to have you join our community, and hopefully we can gather together in the near future to celebrate the start of your journey here at Rhodes College. But for now, as we gather today for our virtual convocation, I'd like to spend a little time reflecting on some of the ways that we can identify the things that we don't know, right? And to kind of start us off, I'd like to offer two questions for your consideration, just as a means of setting the stage. So first, how do you know what you don't know? Just think about the ways that you do this. How do you know what you don't know? And importantly, the second question that goes hand in hand with that first question is, how do I know what I've not been exposed to, right? So we can identify, and we'll walk through an example, we can identify what we don't know if we've been exposed to something, right? That's relatively easy compared to a situation where we're trying to detect the absence of something, the absence of which we know nothing about, right? And so that's what we want to unpack today. But let's consider a scenario first, just for setting the stage, of how do we know what we don't know when we've already encountered that material? Because in most instances, we're going to attempt to identify what we don't know about information that we've encountered either in class or somewhere else in life. So with the school year starting, think about studying for an exam. As we study, I might ask myself, or you might ask yourself, have I studied enough? Have I identified the critical information? And in asking these questions, we're really trying to identify what we don't know, but because we've sat through lecture, because we read the textbook, hopefully you've done both, right? Because we have been exposed to this information in advance, we have some foundation or a basis for identifying what we don't know. It's almost as if we have a sort of checklist. So I know that there are probably 10 major topics that are going to be covered on this exam. If I feel pretty good about 6 of them, guess what? That means that I don't know 4 of them. Right? And this happens all the time outside of the classroom as well. So a parallel scenario would be that at home, we've created a list of 10 items we need to pick up at the grocery store. We're walking the aisles, we pick up this item, we pick up that item, and eventually we look down in our grocery basket and we see we've got 6 items. We know that there were 10 items on that list. We've got 6 of them, and what are the 4 items that are remaining? Even if we can't think of what those 4 items are, we know that we don't know. Because we had that list, because we have 6 items, we know that we don't know what 4 of those items were, right? So in both of these instances where we've encountered the material in some capacity in advance, we have a way of checking our knowledge later. But what happens when that pre-exposure doesn't happen, or we don't have a foundation for making such an assessment? How will you know what you don't know? And for those of you who are sitting there watching this video, hanging on the edge of your seats, why should we care, right? Why should we care? Why should we care that we be able to identify the things we don't know, right? And so think about it. Identifying information we've not been exposed to, detecting the absence of context, the absence of experience, the absence of information is critically important. Because in most instances, in most things that we do and in most things that we encounter, right, the material that we receive is chosen for us. Someone else has crafted the syllabus. So we are determining the content you're going to get. The financial advisor decides in advance what information they want to share with you about the investment product. Same with the doctor and the treatment, right? So in turn, if we don't have this context, it's really hard to make sense of or to interpret or to evaluate the information that we are provided. So again, if we walk down this path and think about studying, let's take it from the perspective where I'm teaching a course, right? And this is hypothetical, but let's say that I'm teaching a course on learning and memory. I may ask you, what do you want to know? What do you want to learn about? What topics are of most interest to you? And then we can co-create the syllabus and co-create the course, right? But guess what? I'm still choosing, at the end of the day, the material that we're covering in that course. And consequently, what that means is I'm choosing the material that's not going to get covered. I'm choosing the readings. And I'm choosing the other folks in the area, the other researchers, the other scholars that we as a classroom community are going to regard as experts. And so what I'm doing in teaching a course on learning and memory is I'm actually sharing a narrative. What's the story of learning and memory? And I'm the author, right? I'm telling you the story that I want you to know about learning and memory. And so in doing so, I'm choosing the theories, the data, the researchers that are critical, and I'm also intentionally or unintentionally choosing the theories, the researchers, the authors, the material that can be overlooked and that can be set aside. And this happens outside of the academy as well. So think about a phenomena of going to the doctor, right? A doctor shapes the narratives of the treatment they're proposing for a patient. A financial advisor shapes the narrative as they sell investment products to clients. And the list goes on and on. And think about these situations, right? If you roll into our class on learning and memory and you don't know how vast that field is, how will you detect that I have wholly left off topics from our syllabus? How will you detect that I'm privileging certain authors over other authors? When you don't know what you don't know, it's dangerous, right? It's dangerous because how do you evaluate what we're actually doing in class? The same thing applies. So how are you going to ask the doctor about these treatments that you don't know much about? Right? How are you going to ask the financial advisor about investment products that you've never heard of? And so that's why I think it's important that we think about how we identify the things that we don't know when we've not been exposed to it in advance, when we have never encountered it in life before, right? So where do we start? How do we actually do this? And I'm going to just tell you up front, I know that I don't have the whole answer here. So I'm going to offer you 3 starting points. Hopefully they help us jump off and start thinking about what this all looks like in terms of identifying the things we don't know. But all 3 things are going to center on asking questions and exploring the world around you. So first, and I think this will be intuitive, ask questions, participate, and engage with eager curiosity. Right? Again, I hope this is intuitive because you've all chosen liberal arts, right, as your inquiry of the next 4 years, right? You're going to be guided by the principles of liberal arts, right? And I think as a result of this, it's going to help you develop a robust tool chest, right? And I want to say up front, that's not to say that attending a big university like I attended would leave you without a robust skill set. Instead, it's to say that the purpose of higher education, especially in the context of liberal arts, should be to empower and liberate. And so across the next 4 years, you should develop and consistently refine a set of tools through an iterative process of inquiry and exploration that will support your lifelong intellectual odyssey, right? So with this in mind, I'm going to make an argument that you absolutely have the right to ask questions and expect answers, right? You should ask the whats and the wheres and the whos, wholly on board with all of it. but I'm going to push you to consistently, repeatedly come back to why. Why does it work in this particular way? Why does it function? Why is this cause and effect relationship present over here in scenario A, but not in scenario B? So always return to the why, right? The second major question, this is true regardless, but is particularly important in 2020, where everyone takes to social media asserting that they have truth, that they know the answer. You need to ask often. Ask it frequently. How do we know that? What evidence do we have, right? Whoever is pontificating and whoever is up here telling you that they know, whichever authority figure that may be, whether that is the president of Rhodes College or your Aunt Sally, how do we know this? What's the evidence? It's not that I don't believe you, I just want to understand better. So tell me, what's the evidence? How do we know that? And so at the same time as I'm encouraging you and telling you that you have the right to ask questions and expect answers, I'm also going to follow that up very quickly. You have the responsibility to seek out and effortfully pursue those answers. You have to take an active role in exploring and investigating and seeking to unearth and illuminate the truth. Because in many instances, at least in your courses, the faculty member will be able to give you an answer very quickly. Here's the answer, because we're all experts in our field. I work with brilliant folks, right? They'll be able to answer those questions. In some instances, and this is very frequent on my front, right? I might tell you, hey, look, here's what I know, but I'm actually going to go back to the primary source and I'm going to try to figure that out and give you more detail. So I'll catch you on Thursday and I'll have an answer for you then, right? Regardless of which scenario happens, you need to take responsibility to start exploring and answering your own questions, right? So while you have the right to ask questions and expect answers, you have the responsibility to do that work as well. The second piece, right? The second piece of advice I'd give you is that you should let your eager curiosity be guided by a commitment to humility. As you engage in the process of inquiry and exploration, do not do so from a position in which you assume that you're correct. Rather, I would urge you, pose your questions and pursue their answers because you might be wrong. And that sounds incredibly weird. It seems counterintuitive. We're supposed to march forward with confidence. And indeed, you should be confident in what you know. But always return to the lens that I could be wrong. Always seek to engage and explore material and concepts and theories and data and techniques and processes in a way that does not seek to confirm your pre-existing belief. You should explore in a way that actually seeks to invalidate those assumptions, right? Because on one hand, like it's a win-win, right? If we think about the big picture here, if we believe that we already have the answer, we will not be inclined to explore the worlds that we didn't know existed. So all of the things we don't know that we don't know will be left untouched. But if we assume that we don't have the answer and we engage wholeheartedly on this exploration, we're very likely to stumble into all of these different dimensions and worlds that we never knew existed. And that's brilliant, that's wonderful, right? Personally, on a what do I get out of taking a I might be wrong approach is a win-win product. Regardless of the outcome, it's a win for you. Because even if you return after your exploration to the same assumption or the same belief, your argument will be stronger because you have a more nuanced and a more thorough understanding of that topic, that theory, the data set, etc. Right? So you're better off. You have a more nuanced and a stronger argument, even if you return to the same starting point. On the other hand, and I would say this is a bigger victory for you, right? You've deconstructed your starting point. You took your pre-existing belief, you examined it, you explored it, you went through all of these other areas that you didn't know initially existed. You've got a more complicated and a more accurate picture, a complicated and more accurate representation of reality. And your argument is stronger for it. And because you went through the deconstruction process, because you've had to rebuild your understanding of the world, you had a moment to grow, and what a wonderful opportunity that is. So again, I would argue that adopting this lens that maybe I'm wrong pushes us to explore the things we don't know that we don't know, and we're going to have a stronger argument for it and a more accurate, more articulate, more nuanced representation of reality. And so finally, third piece, we're almost there. Keep hanging in there with me, right? We're about 14 minutes, so keep going, right? The third and final piece, and then I'll wrap up, I promise, is that we need to seek out perspectives and stories of folks who are not like ourselves, right? We need to seek out the folks and the stories and the perspectives who, at best, are overlooked, and at worst are intentionally excluded and silenced, right? Our studies and academic pursuits, and admittedly, I'm biased, right? I'm biased because I'm a psychologist who minored in sociology. But our studies and our academic pursuits, I will argue, always have implications for human behavior, for human interaction, and for social structures. And this is regardless of academic discipline. Bring me your theories from chemistry. They have implications for human behavior and human interaction. Bring me the content that you grapple with. Bring me the theories from gender and sexuality studies, from Africana studies, right? From anthropology and sociology. They have implications for human behavior and human interaction. Bring me what you're working on in calculus. It's important for human study, human interaction, and human behavior. So with this in mind, a starting point for assessing what we don't know about a topic is to ask, always ask, who's telling this story? Who is the author of this narrative, right? I first started working with these questions when my high school history teacher regularly reminded us that history is written by the winners. And of course, the truth of this statement is that the dominant narratives that we typically encounter in history courses and textbooks are written by those with power. And the notion of the dominant narrative being told and shaped by people in power goes far beyond history. And that's what we need to unpack in the couple minutes, right, that follow. I promise I'm going to wrap up, right? To expand on the point of the narrator and power, Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, in her TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, says, power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Right? And so think about that. Go back to the earlier example where I'm teaching a course on learning and memory. If I am the narrator, if I'm telling the story, you have to ask, who is it that's telling the story? Whose voice am I hearing, right? And so we need to unpack, what are my motivations as the author? Okay? If we go back to the first set of questions, right, really aimed at what do we not know? What have we not been exposed to? We can ask similar questions in this moment. So in addition to asking about who authored the narrative and whose voices were included, you should flip those questions and start asking yourself, who has been excluded? Whose story is being ignored? Right? And perhaps this is the most palpable in humanities and fine arts, where we grapple with protagonists and antagonists who are traversing some sort of plot line, and so we're really thinking about who's speaking and what their motivations are. Perhaps we take in or we reflect on a sculpture or a dance that's supposedly capturing an emotion or experience. Who's the one who has captured that? What is that person's motivation? Whose experience of that emotion is being excluded? And we see it in historical texts, right, that purport to tell an accurate account of what happened in a specific time period or throughout the course of a given event. So we have to ask ourselves, who is telling the story and whose perspective is being overlooked or silenced? Nonetheless, so even if it makes the most sense, even if these questions resonate in the humanities and the fine arts, they're equally relevant for social sciences and natural sciences, disciplines that are guided by the scientific method. And of course, the specific questions that we can ask will vary across disciplines, but broadly, you should be asking yourselves when you go into a natural science course or a social sciences course, who is asking the research question? Who authored the papers that we're reading? Who's shaping the research agenda? And what I'm really asking in that last question is, who is privileging research questions? Which questions are deemed important and which questions are kind of shrugged off and considered a lower priority? Because the author shapes the narrative and the narrative captures the field, we have to think about all of these things because all of these individuals are narrating and shaping what we do, what we privilege, what we're trying to understand, what we're trying to learn, and then consequently, what we share with the world, right? So we really do have to kind of sit with and grapple with who is authoring this and whose voice has been excluded. And once you start to grapple with those two questions, I will then push you to start thinking about the motivations. Why are the voices that are excluded excluded? How might their perspectives change the narrative that I've been sold today? And how do I create space for those other narratives that have been excluded? How do I replace Adichie's notion of a single story with a collection of narratives that captured the multitude of lived experience? Right? That's what we need to grapple with. That's what we need to take with us as we move forward. So we need to really think about bringing eager curiosity. We need to root ourselves with humility because we might be wrong. We often are wrong. Often the world is much more complicated and nuanced than we're aware of. And we need to seek out the voices that have been overlooked and excluded from the narratives that are brought to us, right? And then we need to work actively to craft narratives that avoid and deconstruct single stories. So thanks so much for hanging in there with me. I'm so excited that you're here. I'm so excited that we're starting classes next week. I know that the faculty members cannot wait to get going. Even if we're remote, it's going to be an amazing semester. Welcome to Rhodes. Family, friends, students cannot wait to see you in person. But here we go. Let's get to work.